You are not going to believe what Bose did. You know, Bose. No highs, no lows. Must be Bose. Personally, I have a soft spot in my heart for Bose because I bought the Acoustimass system from the Navy PX over 20 years ago. And at that time, I thought it was pretty cool. That was kind of the height of Bose's popularity. Now look, nobody can argue that Bose didn't have a huge impact on hi-fi and home theater. Without Bose, I don't think multi-channel playback would be as popular as it is now. They did things differently, sometimes a lot differently. But what if I told you that Bose sued a magazine after a review that they didn't care for, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court and set legal precedents? Would you believe me? Crazy, right? So sit down, grab a cup of coffee, and let's talk about Bose and some of the shenanigans that they were up to, what they're doing today, because it's not the Bose of yesterday or the day before that. Bose wasn't a marketing company, they were a research company that accidentally made audio. Founded by Amar Bose, who later became an MIT professor, he was repairing radios when he was 10. A born engineer, not really a salesman. And he was not obsessed about how audio measured. He was obsessed with how people perceive sound, and he created speakers because he bought a high-end audio system and he didn't like how it sounded. That led to the Bose 901. 89% reflections, 11% direct sound. Concert hall in a living room. And people loved it. And those people were not audiophiles. They were normies. And that became a pattern. They created the Acoustimass, which pretty much created multi-channel home theater for everyone. The wave radio, you know, infomercials. They dominated car audio. And Amar didn't like what it sounded like on a plane, so he created noise-canceling headphones for pilots and for people. They didn't win on specs, they didn't win on measurements. Bose won by winning people. But before you could go get a Michael Myers t-shirt at Hot Topic, grab a fistful of Orange Julius and walk next door and buy some Bose noise-canceling headphones, Bose was trying to cancel something else. And it wasn't a reflection or a frequency. It was a magazine. In 1970, Consumer Reports got their hands on a pair of Bose 901s and they wrote an article. A review. But before we get any further, we need to talk about some facts. Consumer Reports took no advertisements. They're a non-profit. They still are, and they used anonymous testing. And they have enormous public trust. This wasn't a hit piece. This wasn't a blog. It wasn't some crazy YouTuber chasing clicks. It was Consumer Reports, for crying out loud. Wasn't some idiot like me with affiliate links. So what did they say? It really wasn't even that bad. They said the 901 sounded big, that they were impressive, that they filled the room. However, they did take a bit of an exception with the way Bose described the way their speakers sounded in some of Bose's marketing materials. Fundamentally, they said the tonal balance was unusual, and the accuracy of the frequency response did not meet Consumer Reports' definition of realistic. And that part matters because they did not say that Bose was lying, that Bose was a scam, that Bose was unethical. They just disagreed about what realistic sound sounded like. It wasn't an accusation, it wasn't a hit piece, it wasn't an expose. However, Bose's marketing material at the time used phrases like concert hall realism, natural sound, lifelike reproduction, and Bose genuinely believed that. And their logic, well, it was simple and it made sense. In a concert hall, most of the things that people hear is indeed reflected sound, not direct sound. Therefore, reflected sound, in Bose's opinion, was more realistic. Not this realistic, that it sounded realistic. And that was the philosophy behind the 901s. That was the philosophy behind the brand. But Consumer Reports had a different definition. Their belief was that realism equaled tonal accuracy, a flat response from a speaker. Faithful reproduction of the recording. You know, what the artist intended, not what the customer actually wants. which is kind of ironic. Sounds like an argument in semantics, doesn't it? Well, of course it does, because that's exactly what it was. Same word, realistic, different meanings. Subjective meanings. When Bose read unnatural tonal balance and does not meet our definition of realism, well, they didn't care for that. Bose heard, this is going to damage our sales. It's going to confuse customers. And this is a threat against our reputation. They didn't think the disagreement was academic. They thought it was harmful. Therefore, they filed a lawsuit. Bose sued Consumer Reports for libel. Bose said the review was reckless, the conclusions were damaging, and that the article hurt Bose's reputation. They did not argue trade secret theft, stolen test data, intellectual property infringement, or falsified test measurements. The case was not about frequency response graphs or lab results, or how the speakers even measured. It was about words. Those damaging, crazy words. Descriptions, interpretations, and what it means to describe how a product even sounds. Realistic or not, Bose wasn't saying Consumer Reports' data was wrong. They were saying that the way that they described the 901 sound crossed a line. And that's when opinions entered the courtroom. The core problem is, well, sound isn't a thermometer. It can't be measured. Realistic, or the description of music as realistic, is, at its core, subjective. There is no universal definition of natural sound. Sound depends on the room, the listener, personal taste, psychoacoustics. Two people can hear the same speaker in the same room at the same time with the same music and, well, have different opinions, and it doesn't mean either of them are wrong. One may hear spacious and lifelike, and the other person may hear colored and not accurate. Neither one of them is lying, and that matters legally. Consumer Reports explained their methods and also explained how they listened and how they defined realism. And that single disclosure changed pretty much everything. Because once that method was made clear, then their conclusion became an opinion. And you can't prove that false in the eyes of the court. That made all the difference.
No, not really. But they better not win.
The ruling. Well, everyone pretty much lost, and it set a bit of a precedent, and not in the ways that you think it should. Bose lost their first case. Bose appealed and lost that case. Bose took it to the Supreme Court and lost unanimously, 9-0. The court ruled that product reviews are protected speech and that evaluative judgments are not libel, even though companies absolutely hate them. The key standard was malice, meaning that you have to prove that the reviewer knew what they were saying was false or acted in reckless disregard to the truth. And Bose couldn't do that because, well, we talked about it earlier, Consumer Reports disclosed their methods. They disclosed why they came up with their conclusion and clearly framed their conclusion as their judgment, which is subjective. The court didn't say that Bose was wrong and Consumer Reports was right. It said something much bigger. We are all allowed to disagree and allowed to describe what we hear. But courts can protect speech, but courts cannot fix power. Reviewers may be protected, opinions may be safe, but lawsuits are still expensive. A large corporation generally has lawyers on retainer, and they're going to pay those lawyers whether or not they do anything. So they might as well have their lawyers do something. They're going to pay those legal fees anyway. Now, a non-profit or a small creator, well, they probably don't have lawyers on retainer. And lawsuits, whether or not they are frivolous, can be an existential threat to a non-profit magazine or an independent creator. And the uncomfortable truth is, these big companies know it, and they know that they don't have to win to win. They just need to outspend the person that they're suing. Drag it out, increase the cost, increase the fear, and eventually, well, the little guy usually just takes down the review. Not because they were wrong, but because they couldn't afford to be right. And that little thing is called chilling speech. The law says that reviewers can speak, that their opinions are protected, but reality, well, kind of says they might not want to. There are things called anti-SLAPP laws, and SLAPP stands for Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation. These lawsuits aren't meant to win, they're meant to exhaust the funds of the people being sued. So the anti-SLAPP rules or laws allow judges to throw out cases almost immediately if they deem that the lawsuit is frivolous and really only filed to bankrupt the person that they're filing against. In some cases, it actually forces the person suing to pay the legal fees of the person being sued. It keeps the act of a lawsuit from being punitive in and of itself, even if the lawsuit is baseless. However, there's something called the DMCA, and that specifically applies to people on YouTube. It's the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. Now, the DMCA is not based on judging opinions, it's based on protecting copywritten materials. It doesn't care if the review is fair. It doesn't care if the review is just filled with reviewers' opinions. It targets copywritten materials in reviews, like music, screens, ads. But here's the big difference. Platforms like YouTube don't investigate. They remove content first, investigate later. And that matters because fair use is just a defense. It's not a shield. You don't get protection up front. You get protection when you fight, which costs money. It's a different tool, but it has the same effect as frivolous lawsuits. It costs money, but the goal is ultimately the same. No negative reviews. And there's a pretty big example that has been going on recently. Rick Beato has an awesome YouTube channel, and most of his content is about music. So oftentimes he has artists come on, play their songs, talk about their riffs, whatever it is. Universal Music Group has been claiming copyright or putting copyright strikes against Rick because of artists coming in and singing their own songs. Even though the clips are purely educational, even though the clips are fair use, it doesn't matter. UMG can still file copyright strikes manually. And Rick has made multiple videos on it. Again, it's a defense. It's not a shield. That creator has to respond. They have to dispute. They have to get lawyers involved. And it's not right, but it is reality. It's easy to reduce Bose to jokes about mall kiosks, no highs, no lows, must be Bose, but that kind of misses the point about their legacy. Bose didn't just make products, they created entire categories. The 901 changed the way people think about their rooms and how music interacts with their rooms from a speaker. Acoustimass fundamentally changed everything for home theater. And of course, noise canceling changed the way everyone wears headphones today. Bose made it possible for normal people in small apartments to have better sound without it being super intrusive because of the little tiny speakers. And the big takeaway is that most people find it incredible. Most people think it's better than their TV. The wave radio is better than a transistor radio. Music through noise canceling headphones that isn't necessarily ruler flat and accurate is better than music through high fidelity headphones on a plane that you can't hear the music because of the background noise. The takeaway is that most people heard their music better through Bose products than through other products. And they didn't have to redesign their lives to do it. And that is the part that really matters. Audiophiles chase perfection, but Bose chased accessibility for most people. Plug it in, put it where it fits, and press play. And for millions of people, Bose was hi-fi. But while Bose absolutely crushed it with innovation, they haven't been lately. Amar Bose passed away in 2013, and since then they haven't done a lot of groundbreaking product releases. But they have started doing something different, and that is acquisitions. They purchased Macintosh and Sonus Faber. Not to replace Bose products, but to sit alongside them. And let's be real, they want that sweet Macintosh money. Probably the name to put into car audio. Bose didn't fail, they didn't disappear, Maybe they matured, maybe they changed strategies, but they went from inventing new ways for people to hear music at scale to buying companies and acting like any big major corporation. The other interesting thing is that the majority of the Bose shares, which is not a public company, are owned by MIT now. It's kind of weird. It's like a for-profit, non-profit hybrid, very similar to Rolex. But none of that matters, because whether or not you love them or you hate them or joke about them, our world, your world is changed because of Bose. If you like this video, check out the other video I did, which digs into a little bit more of Bose's history, specifically with the acquisition of Macintosh. And I'll put that right here. Thank you so much for watching.